All right, this is Jerry Amernick. I'm the author of Babe Ruth, A Superstar's Legacy, which is available on Amazon.com, in both print and as an ebook, and at the website BabeRuthLegacy.com. Today we're back with the Babe Ruth Legacy interviews, and my guest today is a very interesting guy, Bill Jenkinson, baseball historian, researcher, author, and something of an expert on Babe Ruth. In 2008, he gave the eulogy for Babe Ruth at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. It was to honor the 60th anniversary of Ruth's death, which of course was in 1948. And a couple years later, in 2010, he spoke at an event inducting Babe Ruth into the World Sports Humanitarian Hall of Fame in Boise, Idaho, where he was accompanied by Babe's daughter, Julia Ruth Stevens. And I want to read something from his speech that day. He said, as early as 1918, at age 23, Ruth began his long journey to integrate Major League Baseball. Men of color from Ruth's day were well aware of Babe's efforts on their behalf, and to a man told me in numerous interviews of their heartfelt appreciation. In fact, the historical evidence strongly suggests that Babe Ruth did not achieve his lifelong dream of managing a big league team because of his advocacy of integration. Welcome, Bill Jenkinson. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
Well, that's quite something. So we want to get into that. And maybe before we do, you can tell me a little bit about this event you had at the end of March in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Tell us a little bit about that and what that was all about.
Well, there's a significant baseball history in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Most folks are unaware of the fact that spring training actually began there in 1886.
Wow.
And all through the first quarter of the 20th century, it was a hotbed of spring baseball.
Right.
So starting a few years ago, they decided they would honor that heritage and establish a historical baseball trail, which they've done. And there are 32 plaques now. In our recent event, we put up the last two plaques, one for Bill Dickey, a native Arkansan, and for Lefty Grove, who resurrected his career.
Yes.
On two occasions. He recovered from a sore arm by taking the hot baths and hiking through the mountains and doing those types of things. And most importantly, as it relates to our discussion today, we honored the 100th anniversary of baseball's first confirmed 500-foot home run. It was hit by Babe Ruth on March 24th, 1918, and we had a special ceremony there exactly 100 years to the day.
Right. That's wonderful. And Tom Stevens was there, and Brent Stevens was there as well, I understand.
Yep. Yeah. As many members of the family were able to travel.
Okay, well, that's great. So, Bill, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in researching Babe Ruth. And I know initially it was you were looking into power hitters, and then you got into the race thing, and I think that's quite a fascinating story. So you were a legal investigator, as I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, Jerry. I was one of those guys who, getting towards the end of my college days, realized that sitting at a desk for 8 hours wasn't going to work for me.
That's what I do every day now. So
I wound up working for a large self-insured public utility, and some of my cases were routine, but some of them, as you might expect when you deal with power, you find yourself facing explosions and fires and things. And those sorts of cases would oftentimes wind up in court. And so it didn't take me long to learn that my opinions didn't count for anything in those situations. And I to be able to develop the ability to tell the difference between fact and fiction. And starting in 1979, when I became active as a baseball historian, I think it helped me, especially, as you said, since I was dealing with this highly romanticized subject of long distance hitting.
Right.
A lot of hyperbole and exaggeration there.
So you started exploring power hitters through the ages, not just contemporary, but through the ages. And that's something you told me when we talked a little while ago. You said you went into this not necessarily as a fan of Babe Ruth. You were just looking for the facts, comparing hitters from one era to the next.
Well, I was an admirer of Babe Ruth, I guess mostly because my father had been.
Right.
And I was told by so many of my older family members that he was a special guy, not only athletically, but behaviorally.
Yeah.
There was quite an affection for him, so I think I had that as well.
And I have to interject, because you have to tell us this story about your dad. Yeah, you told me that he took you to a game when you were 6, and you lived in Philadelphia, and he used to go to the Philadelphia the athletics games against the Yankees. Yes. And saw Ruth play, and you've got a wonderful story from your father about Babe Ruth.
Well, there are a lot of them, Jerry. I'm not sure which one you mean. We could start with the fact that when Babe was playing then at Shibe Park, he played left field, and one day my dad was sitting in a low box seat. Yeah. When Ruth wasn't coming to bat for the following inning, Babe just dropped his glove out there, as the players used to do. And just instead of going to the dugout, he ran into the stands. And he sat a couple seats away from my dad and ordered hot dogs and sodas for every kid in the section.
That's great. And your dad was one of those kids, yeah.
That's the one time that my dad directly benefited from his largesse, but he told me that he personally saw Ruth do that on dozens of occasions.
Right, that's wonderful. Okay, so let's go back to you were investigating power hitters, and that resulted in some books. Tell us about that.
Well, as you've just stated, the goal was to get some facts instead of all the pre-existing fiction about who really was the strongest hitter in baseball.
Right.
And along with all the others who would rank close behind that person.
Right.
And I had reason to believe that Babe would finish somewhere in the top 10 or 20.
Oh.
But I
Why
also...
Why only the top 10 or 20?
Now, well, we're not talking about relative performance. We're talking about pure, measurable physical performance.
Okay, so you had assumed at the outset that some of the more recent players would have surpassed him.
In pure physical performance, simply because in every athletic function, then and now, there are no known examples of anyone from prior eras being physically superior to the contemporary performers.
Okay.
It just doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, back then, when I started doing this, the oldest measurable record was Bob Beeman's 1968 broad jump at the Olympics in Mexico City. And, of course, eventually that record was broken as well. But I knew just enough to realize that if you can measure how fast, how far, how high, that old guys, because they didn't have the nutrition, the strength training, the improved equipment, they're just not going to measure up.
Yeah, and they generally weren't as big either. So
they have all the disadvantages that you can commonly identify, including size.
Okay, so your extensive research, what did you finally conclude?
Well, it only took about 2 years. I'm talking about as early as 1981, when the initial research had been done, and all the arrows pointed to Babe Ruth as being the strongest hitter ever.
Right, even more so than the more recent players.
Yeah, and I frankly just rejected it. It just I realized that I hadn't done a comprehensive study, and it really would take 25 years to do that.
Yeah.
At least it put Ruth on the radar to take a closer look at this guy. Let's face it, he was born in 1895, and my initial findings just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But as I proceeded through the 80s and the 90s, the initial conclusion was borne out in every single way that I could quantify it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now talking to you in 2018, and I have zero doubt that Babe Ruth is the strongest batsmen in the history of professional baseball.
Yeah. Well, that's quite amazing when you consider the size of the guys today. And I mean, you look at the Yankees this year and the lineup, they're calling them Murderers Row 2.0. And these guys make Ruth look like a midget. And in his time, of course, Ruth was generally the biggest guy on the field. So you're looking at how far he hit the ball, the frequency of the long shots, the equipment, the size of the ballparks, and all this various criteria. Is that right?
Everything.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the single most compelling example, Jerry.
Okay.
All of the great long-distance hitter of the modern era have played in the annual All-Star Home Run Derby.
Yes.
Goes back to the 80s.
Right.
And you're talking about Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge.
Yeah.
And they're magnificent physical specimens.
Absolutely.
No question about it. And they are clearly today's two longest hitters. I would say maybe Joey Gallo in Texas would be ranked number 3 for distance right now.
Yeah.
But the two Yankees are the top.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at how far they hit their batting practice or home run derby drives last year, and in Stanton's case, even before that, and they peak out at just a little over 500 feet.
Wow. Okay.
And we also know that holds true for just about everybody. The longest example we have, the example for the longest home run is from Sammy Sosa in the home run derby.
Mm-hmm.
And people also know something about the history of his physiology.
Yes.
I'll just leave it at that. And he maxed out at 524 feet. And that's by far the longest ever in the year history of the home run derby. Okay?
Yeah.
So now we go to Babe Ruth, who was measured a grand total of 1 time in his entire active playing career.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
That was October 4th, 1925, in an exhibition game in Long Island, New York.
And 1925 was a bad season for him.
Jerry, if we want to take this to its fullest extent, I can tell you that he had relapsed from his so-called stomachache heard round the world earlier in the season. It was an abscess, of course, with a certain remedy. And as the season had worn on, he had gotten stronger and stronger and was recovering from it.
Okay.
So at the end of the season, he relapsed somewhat and was suffering again from the same problem. They thought they might have to do additional surgery. Not only that, he had sprained his ankle.
Yeah.
So he shows up that day at the Arco Field in Long Island, and it's raining.
Yeah.
And he feels terrible.
Yeah.
But they had announced that they were going to organize a batting exhibition for him that day before the actual game. And they were going to have adult employees stand in the outfield with wooden stakes and hammers.
Yeah.
And they were going to be assisted with a steel tape. I can't think of any better methodology for measuring the distance of a batted ball.
Sure.
So that one time and one time only hit a ball that's measured at 538 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I could go on for as long as people would want to listen about other examples, but I think if you just tell that one story, it's got to convey the supernatural power that this man possessed.
Right.
I can't explain it. I just know that it existed.
Now, one of your books is the year Babe Ruth had 104 home runs, and from what I understand, that looks at the 1921 season when he was with the Yankees. He hit 59 home runs that year, and with all your analysis and research, you believe that looking at modern-sized ballparks back then, the bats and everything else, you're saying he would have had 104 home runs in one season?
Yes, what I did, Jerry, is I made an extrapolation.
Right.
I took his pattern of batted balls for that season.
Right.
It would include a few that were regarded as foul.
Yeah.
According to the rules that were enforced
Yeah.
Took his flyouts, his doubles, his triples, whatever,
Right.
and plotted them on a grid that represents a typical modern stadium, the average distance of all the ballparks.
So some of those foul balls and doubles and triples would have been home runs.
Oh, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, interesting.
And
yeah.
now he lost a few because he was playing in the Polo Grounds at the time.
Yeah.
And he hit 5 right down the right field line, which was ridiculously short. That counted for home runs for him then. That would not be home runs today.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Okay? But after you take away those 5, then you wind up adding another 50. Now,
wow.
if he were doing it today,
yeah,
people would look at his numbers. Everybody has computers. And my guess is they wouldn't let him do it. They'd probably walk him 250 times.
Probably. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Now, let's move into this issue of race, and that quote I read off the top of our interview today. You've been looking into this for a long time. Tell our listeners in a nutshell, why do you believe Babe Ruth was never hired as a manager? Because he did not believe in racial segregation. Why do you believe that?
I believe it, Jerry, because I can't find any plausible explanation as to why he didn't manage. First of all, there's a couple misconceptions, and especially there's one unattributable quote. It's been alleged that Yankee owner Jacob Rupert once told Ruth, why would anyone think you can manage when you can't manage yourself?
Yeah, and apparently there's no evidence that Rupert ever said that.
Correct.
Right.
Someone said it in the book, and you know how this works.
It goes viral. Right.
It goes viral.
Yeah.
Or at least the equivalent of what would have been viral.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
And I can't swear to you that Rupert never said it, but I've been at this now for 30 years,
right,
and I can't find any evidence said it.
Okay.
And certainly he would have had no reason to say it as of 1930 when Ruth first became serious about becoming a manager.
Right.
So a lot of people just take that as fact, and I believe that it's not. It's also true that in his day, in real time, Ruth was regarded as a baseball genius.
Right.
Now, there are, and you know that from your own research.
Yeah.
And he considered to be a guy who had a great baseball mind.
Right.
So when you consider his drawing power as a magnet for fans, you wonder why wasn't Ruth given a chance to manage? Well, then you also look at the real-time history, and I've identified 10 different teams who expressed an interest in managing him.
Mm-hmm. 10 teams.
And as I think you and I just 10 teams.
Yeah. Okay.
Who said they were interested in hiring. Now, they would have known his full history before they even said that.
Right.
And then they go public and say, I have an interest, including the Cincinnati Reds at the end of the 1933 season, where they say, we want Babe Ruth to be our manager. Mm-hmm. And within a very short period of time, we find Jacob Rupert, the Yankees manager, reversing his position from just a few months before, where he said he would give Ruth his release if he ever got an opportunity, and now Rupert refuses to let him go.
Now you mentioned you mentioned Ruth's history that baseball owners, managers knew at the time, which goes back to 1918, when he was barnstorming and played against Cubans, played against black players. He hit against Satchel Paige on his barnstorming tours, and he had a history of playing against black players at a time when they weren't allowed to play in Major League Baseball.
Exactly, and that's the second half of the story, Jerry.
Yeah.
As you said, starting in 1918, Ruth made overt efforts to play as often as he could against the old so-called Negro League players.
Right.
And made many public pronouncements of his support for Major League Baseball. He made it entirely clear that he would like black ball players to be included on Major League franchises. So it's my guess, and it's a one based on a lot of thought. I can't prove it absolutely, but it's my guess that every time that then Commissioner Kennesaw Matt Landis heard about the prospect of Ruth being managed, that he intervened.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of revisionists now who claim that Landis did not impede the progress of baseball integration. Of course, that's baloney. When he died, there is a direct timeline between his death and Jackie Robinson's entry into Major League Baseball.
So Landis died in 1944, and Jackie
Yes.
Robinson was brought in by Branch Rickey for the 1947 season.
Yeah, and some people see that 3-year interlude and think that there's no linkage because of it.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, what happened was that Branch Rickey pounced immediately, and everybody knew what he was doing, so they were waiting to see how his experiment worked out.
Okay.
So Rickey called his scouts together,
Right.
and they spent the 1945 season looking for the right guy.
Right. Exactly. So let's go back to Mr. Ruth. Now, I know you've got a collection of old newspaper clippings, most of them from 1933 and 1934, when Ruth's career was winding down, and he made it known publicly that he wanted to be a manager. And you sent me some of these clippings, and there's many stories about one team or another. You say it's as many as 10 teams. I didn't even realize it was that many. But one team or another expressing interest in having Ruth as their manager, and it never happened.
Yes.
Now, I've checked with the people at Cooperstown, SABR, Society of American Baseball Research, and asked around when I was doing my book. Is there any evidence that anything like this ever happened? A directive, collusion. The word collusion came up, and everybody has told me there is no evidence at all. There is no smoking gun, and in a court of law, you wouldn't be able to prove a thing. So that may be the case, but you still believe this is the story.
Well, the fact that it can't be proven in a court of law means nothing to me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
No, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't have any proof. If I had, it would be out there and everyone would be talking about it right now. I still believe it's likely that it happened. I said a few minutes ago that I don't have proof.
Yeah.
But I don't see any other plausible explanation. If team after team
Yeah.
publicly expressed an interest in signing this guy,
Yeah.
there's nothing that they learned about this guy after making those public proclamations that they already didn't know.
Right.
They already knew everything about him
Yeah.
and expressed a willingness to hire him as their manager. Then in every single case they backed off for different reasons, most of which I have been able to find out most of the reasons were not valid. I hear stories that in 1933 that the Detroit Tigers wanted to hire Babe Ruth, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
And that Babe insulted Tiger manager Frank Navin by going on a prearranged business trip to Hawaii, where he played a series of exhibition games. And they went instead and hired Mickey Cochran. Now, I'm sure that Navin was glad that he did, because Cochran did a great job for him. But the fact is that when I look into those stories about Ruth offending Navin, there's no proof of that whatsoever. None.
Okay.
That was a story that was offered by the Tiger organization after the fact.
Right. Okay.
In real time, Navin was fine with Ruth going to Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at example after example, and when push comes to shove, nobody hires him, and you believe that's the reason. And based on the research I've done, I'm inclined to agree with you for sure. And we get into that in the book. You go back to his career, all the barnstorming tours, which Major League Baseball did not want him to do, and playing against the old Negro leagues and everyone else. I've heard it said too, critics of Ruth, where they say he wasn't as great as people say because he didn't play against black players, but that was really through no fault of his own. Baseball was segregated. So you feel there's a direct line as to why he never became a manager, and Julia has told me, and Tom and members of the family, that the last 13 years of his life he was really in a sad state because nobody would hire the biggest star in baseball. And at least according to your research and what I found, there might be a very good reason for that.
Yeah, and it makes me sad just thinking about it, Jerry. The guy, as you've come to know, and as has everyone who has researched the man, he had a beautiful soul.
Yeah.
An imperfect person, of course, but a very caring, loving, generous man. And it hurt him profoundly.
Yeah.
He was not given the chance to do what he most wanted to do with the second half of his life.
If your thesis is true, do you think it ever dawned on him that that was the reason why he was never hired to be a manager?
Not that I know of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not that I know of, because Julia,
yeah,
who of course is a wonderful source of
yes,
information about her beloved daddy,
yeah,
doesn't recall him ever asserting.
Yeah.
He just didn't understand it. I think he would have been a much happier man if Landis had had the guts just to come out and tell him. Of course, Landis wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah.
But if someone had just explained it to him, he would have been angry. He probably would have been very emotional for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But at least he would have had an answer.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have been sitting around for 13 years waiting for the phone to ring.
Okay. Well, Bill, the last question I want to ask you is, my book is all about the legacy of Ruth. As you know, it's not a biography, and it's nothing like a biography, but it looks at the legacy of Ruth on many different levels. Why do you think Babe Ruth has withstood the test of time? Why do you think his iconic image is just out there to such a degree so many years after his death?
Well, I think his life represents a unique combination of different factors. We've already talked about the fact that he was physically transcendent. Let's face it, that has to be the starting point.
Yeah.
Or he wouldn't have become famous.
Yeah.
But once he did work his way into the public eye, as you well know from your own work,
yeah,
he was almost certainly not only the greatest player ever, but the greatest showman ever.
Yes, for sure.
And then when you combine that with his personal characteristics, some of which were negative, the guy was so aggressive as a player, he tended to injure himself. He got sick.
Yeah.
And, he had that weight problem.
Yeah.
People heard about the fact that he wasn't formally educated. So I believe there was this natural bondage between himself and the common man.
Yes.
And people related to him. And then when they would see him overcome all these various adversities, I think that the bond only increased. And when they would hear the story about him with the children, which were almost always true, they found that, wow, I can feel some sort of linkage with this guy. He's like me.
People could identify with him.
Yeah. He gets knocked down.
Yeah.
He's a common man. He gets knocked down. He gets back up, and he swings for the fences.
Right.
And they love him.
Yeah.
They love him.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, listen, Bill, I want to thank you for joining us, and I also want to thank you for all the help you gave me. There were many phone calls and interviews and emails, and you've really been very helpful, and I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, and we're definitely going to be in touch again. You take care.
You're welcome for everything, Jerry. It was a pleasure. I love your book. Good luck with it.
Thank you.